Alright, so today I'm going to run through the workflow on how to do a flipper in D3 Denture. So to get started, I'm going to come up here, I'm going to select D3 Denture for my workflow, and I'm going to set it as a denture case. And that's going to bring us over here into the D3 Tool Manual Tool tab, where you'll see it retained my denture as the case type. And here I'm going to name the default case. I'm going to go ahead and just name mine Flipper Tutorial. And I'll just leave it on my desktop because this is a demo case. And go ahead and create. It'll create the folder that'll retain all of my files. Now I can go ahead and import my scans. I went ahead and just put these on my desktop for convenience sake. So I have a case in which I virtually extracted 2 of the teeth. You can see here, these could be scans done beforehand, so you can virtually extract the teeth. If they already had the extraction done, you can scan it and have their actual soft tissue data. Either way. Now, we do recommend that you base the models. As you can see, mine are already based. If yours are just scans, you can click over here real quick to the model work tool, and with the scan selected, you can just click simple base. If there's any sort of like distal heel or extra, scan data you don't need, you can also trim the model first. So I'm going to switch back to the manual tool tab and go ahead and set my maxillary and my mandibular. And then I'm going to go ahead and set these both as dentate scans. And mine are both models. And mine are already aligned. So now I can go ahead and mark the maxillary landmarks, which this is pretty much the same setup as D3 Splint and all of our other denture workflows. You're just going to give your 4 main points and commit. And now we're going to get to work on actually building our foundation for our flipper. I'm going to start by picking my upper insertion axis. Now, depending on if you are doing any gum data by the facial of the teeth up here on this side, or if you're doing like a true flipper and it's going to be just the teeth, you may have a more palatal kind of orientation as opposed to kind of a direct line here. So I'm actually not going to do any gingiva on this case on this upper side, so I'm going to go ahead and kind of tilt it back. So you'll click capture view. It's the same as the insertion axis in D3 Splint, and you'll see my undercuts are displayed in red. I'm not going to have any data in any of this area, so the only undercuts I could engage are right here. And I'm going to go ahead and say that that's pretty good for this case. You can tweak left, right, anterior, posterior by clicking these buttons if you wanted to adjust it just a little bit. And there are some quick guides up here to give you quick reference views. Not as necessary for the flipper. We don't care nearly as much about the right and left. So I'll go ahead and hit commit. Now the lower insertion axis, the lower refractory and lower margin are all visible here, but we do not have to click those steps. And in this case, we don't want to. So I'm going to go ahead and go to my upper refractory. You may choose not to block out undercuts in this case. I'm not going to, but I'm also not printing this test case. So that will be individual discretion. We also have the advanced options where you can adjust the resolution if desired. All right, and so now I'm going to go ahead and click my upper margin, and that's where I'm going to start drawing where I want my actual appliance to be. This, like every other margin, is going to be kind of at your discretion. Some people only go through that first molar. You may want to go higher or lower on the teeth. I'm just going to make a quick kind of scalloped edge for this. And then I'm going to bring my margin line a little bit out here so that it really has something for the teeth to grab onto when I place them. But I want to make sure that I have enough room. I can always sculpt it down a little bit later on. And like any other margin drawing line in our software, you can also hold Shift on your keyboard and hold down left click and then draw it. You may prefer this, you may prefer to just click the dots. In a case like this, I tend to find less dots is easier to adjust as I go. So I usually just click the points. You can always add additional ones as well. But either way, and if you're just unsatisfied, if you click on this tool menu up here, so we do have an option to connect endpoints, clear any loose points, clear the last point, and clear all. So if you're just completely unsatisfied, you can click this clear all and it'll restart. So I'm just going to go ahead and click right through real fast. Alright, and then you'll click next and it'll ask you to identify the interior region. You'll click next again and it'll create your patch. And then I'm going to click gingival bases. Now, one of the key differences for a flipper is going to be this border molding radius. It's at 1.5 by default. I'm going to knock it to 1.1. And what this does is it's going to make sure that I don't have that kind of rolled edge that we usually have for the dentures. I don't really want that on a flipper, so I'm going to knock that value down and make sure that exact borders is selected. Click OK, and now you'll see I have my flipper base set up. Now we have these mark ridge curves, which is great for helping to identify kind of a line for the occlusal planes and to help establish where you want to drop the set of teeth. This is particularly useful for a full denture. It's not as necessary for this, but it does kind of help get a rough placement. So it's going to ask you to draw a maxillary and a mandibular curve. And I don't have any teeth here, so I'm just going to kind of go out and around, and you'll notice it'll kind of start to adjust as I go. I'm going to click back over here. I missed that one. And then go ahead and hit next. So now I can do the mandibular curve. And there is a little instruction tab right here that kind of goes over the hotkeys. If you ever forget them, that's on most panels. And you'll see as I'm clicking, it's starting to generate this gray line. And if I rotate it, you'll see it's kind of going almost where the cusps are meeting through the two arches. And it kind of goes right along the outer cusps on the upper teeth. I'm going to click next, and there is an option to adjust the curves. So, you know, if you needed to raise or lower the line the same way you would adjust the wax curves, you can adjust these lines to adjust where this curve has ended up. And it also helps establish the natural U shape of the teeth so that you don't have to modify the arches. It's going to snap them for us. So I'll go ahead and hit commit. And you can select this box to choose which shape of tooth you want. I'm just going to go ahead and place the square tapering. Click place tooth library. Now that's going to snap just into the scene. As you can see, it's not even close to our line. Just click place to curve, and it's going to line them up along that curve, but all it did was move them. You'll see it's still not snapped to this line as much. Adapt to curve midline is going to resituate those teeth and kind of give us a better rounded out guesstimate of the overall final product. And you'll see it kind of flared them out a little bit. And now we have a rough placement here on our teeth. So now I want to really kind of finesse those two teeth into place. They are not perfectly lined up, and at this point I could, move the arch a little bit if I wanted to, but I'm primarily focused on these two teeth. So I'm just going to go ahead and jump into tooth transform mode and get rid of a lot of these extra teeth that I do not need. So there are a couple menus here that are important. There's the tool here, and that's going to allow me to select whether I want to move, rotate, scale, or move and rotate whatever I have selected, so these teeth. And you'll see two types of controls. There's these arrows that allow me to move them, and you'll see it's still adjusting to the line. So if you had a partially dentate case, you could kind of move these based on existing teeth, and they'll help shift relatively quickly. And the same goes for rotate. So if I were to seriously rotate one of these teeth, you'll see it kind of adjusts the position based on the room necessary for the current position of the tooth. And then up here in the UI menu, if I drop that down, you're going to see this kind of color-coded chart. And that's going to let me select bigger groups of teeth and individual teeth without having to click them in the scene. So I obviously don't need any of my lower teeth, so I'm going to select this dark gray box here, and you'll see it selects the entire lower jaw. And right here, I can click delete tooth. Now, I can also select the blue, and it's going to select the posterior. I don't need those, so I can delete my teeth. If I click the green, let's see. So I want to make sure that these teeth are here, and you could use other teeth temporarily if I wanted to really kind of solidify that I didn't want this one to overlap. I could place this tooth roughly in the place of the tooth on the scan. So if I wanted to rotate and see right here and kind of line it up closer to the true anatomy of the other tooth, and then I could lock that tooth. So now when I select this tooth and I go to move it, it's not going to move or adjust that one, and it can give me a little bit better of a solid view. Now I'm going to just manually delete these other teeth real quick because I don't need them. And from here I can begin to kind of finesse the teeth. I can scale them if I need a little bit more width to work with. If I needed more length, I can kind of adjust that. Rotate them. And you'll want to spend a couple minutes doing this. You can rotate and get all of your different angles kind of lined up. You can see your lower jaw. kind of look and see, check the other side for reference a little bit. I could spend a good bit of time kind of working on this. I'm not going to, just because this is, like I said, a demo case. This is not for a patient, this is just for training. And as satisfying as it is to put the teeth where they're needed, it will not serve much educational purpose. So I'm just going to go ahead and very quickly drop this into an OK position, and then I want to make sure that I delete that locked tooth as well. And now I'm going to go ahead and hit commit. If you were unhappy, you could of course go back into tooth transform mode, and there is an option to grind occlusion. So I'll go ahead and hit OK on that. These are anterior teeth without much impact, so I don't know that it'll have much visual impact if you're doing like a full lower denture. There's be more likely to have results. It looks like it got a little bit of overlap that it may have subtracted right here, but that's hardly any contact. So there's a few other things that we're going to go ahead and skip that's not necessary for a flipper. There's a generate roots option. If you were going to do a lot of gingiva on the facial side right here, you might want to do that to kind of mimic some of the natural gingival appearance, but we don't need that. So we also don't need to generate gingiva from the roots or join the gingiva. So now we can come right down and sculpt upper gingiva. And so you'll see my gingiva's a different color. It'll be a random color usually. In this case, I do have some poking through right here. So I have two options. I can either sculpt it down to remove it, or I could kind of sculpt it to mimic this. Depending on what you're going for, how much glazing you're intending to do and whatnot, you can kind of decide what's best for your case on that. Up here, I can change my brush radius by pulling it or by changing the value right here, and you'll see it's changing the size of that red circle. I'm going to err on the side of a smaller brush, and you can also change the strength. So if you want to do more or less change, I could turn it up really high, and I could choose the clay strips, and that would let me either build up material relatively quickly, or if I hold shift on my computer, it'll actually inverse it. So sitting here holding shift, I can kind of scrape that and remove a lot of it relatively quickly. So I'll go ahead and build it up just for this case, so I can kind of show some of the other sculpt tools in case you are doing the upper gingiva. Because there's a few other things for if you want your flipper stronger. I have a high brush strength. I could get a slightly bigger brush radius. And with that same clay strips, I could really build up some material back here behind these teeth if I wanted to have, you know, kind of that taper down the mountain here on the back side. And there's also a smooth brush, so I could just kind of smooth that out and build it up. And you can also use that to kind of smooth some of these other details. The way it automatically extracts from the shell, it'll kind of have this rough edge, so you can just run the smooth brush across it and round it out. If you don't want the margin to move quite as much as you're seeing here, you might want to use a much lower strength brush so that it gives it a little less change like back in here. But if you want it really rounded, you could use the higher strength. And you'll see up here, you can also hide the base as well as the refractory model if you needed to for any reason. So you can change the opacity there if you're trying to get a look at something. If you are doing gingiva up here, we have some other brushes like the gingival roll, which will kind of help you add detail. And it's hard to see on this side, but we have the gingival roll brush, which can be used to add details. And then there's also the gingival crease. Now you can hit Control You cannot hit Control Z to undo a brush here. So you're going to want to have a little bit more intention with these brushes. But you can pretty much smooth out or scrape off anything. There's also that same fill brush, so if you wanted to fill in a high peak, you could do that as well. I'm just going to smooth this right here. Let's see, this is where I could really use my gingival roll. Just kind of follow that natural pattern right here. Give it that point. Maybe use the gingival crease, kind of taper it. Probably better off just to remove this, but in case you're wanting to know how to do the upper, I'll just leave it. So then you can smooth or sculpt as much as you like. When you're done, hit commit. And now here's your options to finalize denture. So there's going to be two options. There's monolithic and there's split. Split, if you were doing a gum and a tooth resin separate, would separate the two. For most flippers, it'll probably be a monolithic. If you don't have to glaze, the underside on the palette, you probably don't want to. So you can go ahead and click OK and then export as usual. And that's how you do your flipper in D3 Denture.